been meaning to call you for a couple of weeks, and this is our pal Ted Cox, who's the Judicial Administrator at Caddo Juvenile Court, and I'm wondering to know, you guys have had a committee working on this for a while. State law is changing, which is moving 17-year-olds to juvenile court. Where do we stand now? We're closing in on that happening, right?
Well, it's going to happen 1 July 2018. That's when we get all misdemeanors and light felonies. 17-year-olds are coming back into juvenile jurisdiction. So to answer your question, yes, there's been a lot of discussion. Keep in mind, you go back and take a look at the history. We went out for a tax increase 3 times and had our backside handed to us each time by the voters. They are our bosses, so they tell us whether or not we're going to get the funding. So what we have to do is take the funding that we receive and use it as best we can. Now, I do think that for the next 2 years, we're going to be able to handle the increase in the number of juveniles with the 17-year-olds. Again, it's misdemeanors and light felonies. 2020 is when we get the serious offenders, the serious felonies. Now, that's going to be a complete different ballgame. But for right now, I do think that we're going to be able to handle the situation and make sure that the kids receive the rehabilitation that they need, the programs that we have, the diversion programs, the programs placing them on probation. You know, I often tell people, they say, what do you do for a living? I somewhat say tongue-in-cheek, but I'm very serious. We're in business of raising kids. But you need to ask me some questions. I could go on and on.
Yeah, we got some.
Mr. Ted, pardon me, and maybe I'm reading between the lines, but I just don't hear a lot of ebullience or optimism in your voice. Do you think this was just
now,
a really...
Be careful, Robert. Don't try to read anything into my
Well, that's why
voice,
I'm asking
okay?
you. I might be misreading your tone.
He might have an infection. You never know.
I might be misreading your...
Actually, I worked out real hard this morning. I'm out of breath. Okay.
Well, let me just ask you bluntly. You sound a little negative about this, Ted. Am I wrong? Is this a brilliant idea?
No, I'm not negative. What we've got to do is we've got to take the resources that we have and do the very, very best job that we can. Now, the juvenile court, the judges in the juvenile court, we no longer control probation and detention. We created a Department of Juvenile Services, and that's run by Clay Walker, and the Caddo Parish Commission comes under the Caddo Parish Commission, and Clay and his probation officers and detention workers have done an excellent job, and I'm not just blowing smoke. I'm being very sincere.
Excuse me a second,
Ted. I think
Ted.
we're in a better situation than a lot of other jurisdictions.
Pardon me just a second, but back to the original question. Since you're the guy, since you are the boot on the ground, as it were, in your professional mind, is this a good or a bad idea?
Well, I think it's a good idea with some caveats, okay? And I'm trying to wiggle out of this a little bit. I don't think you need to put a 17-year-old in with hardened adult criminals, okay? Now, put that off to the side. I also don't think, and I think it's very challenging to put 17-year-olds in with 15, 13, 14, 15-year-old kids, all right? So what we've got to do is take the situation. I would like to see, in my opinion, I think we need some kind of middle school. You know, we have what we call secure care. What is secure care? That's juvenile prison, all right? Now, and I'm kind of bouncing all over the radar screen here, but our recidivism rate coming out of detention is fairly low. But what we have to deal with is a certain element that these kids come back and forth all the time. So that's kind of our hardcore population of a few kids that we have to deal with that come back and forth. And those are the ones we try to really concentrate on. If you were to say, okay, here's $1 million, do whatever you want to with it, I personally would take it and hire more probation officers. I wouldn't build or increase our jail space.
Ted, let me ask you this. Did the Justice Reinvestment Act, did that have an impact on you guys too with regard to your inmates in your jail?
No, it does not. That has to deal with adults.
Okay, so that's my issue then. So you didn't open the door and let people out. You've got 24 beds, is that right?
24, 25.
Okay. What do you do?
When we go over that, then we have to send a memo down to the Supreme Court and explain why we're over our limit.
You don't have a backup where you can send 3, hey, I'm going to call Jim Bob down in Sabine Parish and send 3 to you.
No. They're calling us, okay?
Okay.
So what do you do when you max out? What do you do when you have more than the 24? And when they ship these kids down or back to juvenile, into the juvenile system, and you're going to be overloaded, what the heck? What's the plan?
Well, we do get overloaded, okay? And we'll be quite candid. We have probably one of the better systems in the state, because we have our delinquency duty judge who's on call literally 24/7. And that judge gets a call, and he makes a decision whether or not, or she makes a decision whether or not that child or that juvenile stays in the detention. The majority of kids that come through detention are released. The majority of kids who are released do not commit crimes. But there is an element that goes out there and recommits crimes. All right, that's the ones we're having to deal with. But going back to your original question, are we going to be able to handle the 17-year-olds when they hit the system in 1 July? Yes, because I think we are dealing with misdemeanor crimes and light felonies. So,
but will this mean, we're talking to Ted Cox, will this mean to the average Joe listening, will this mean that some people who should be locked up won't be?
Well, again, and I know I'm kind of squirming here. That's a loaded question. Some juveniles that we think should be released, there's probably some people in the general public and even law enforcement officers who say, no, keep the kid locked up. One thing we do know for sure, the longer you keep a kid locked up, the better criminal he becomes, and his chances of going into the adult system increase drastically. So what we try to put in place is probation officers who are very aggressive and work with these kids. We've got some very good programs. We've got a mental health court. We've got a juvenile drug court. We've got work with Volunteers for Youth Justice, who run the majority of our diversion programs. So we have a comprehensive program. Actually, and I know a lot of people don't believe this, but actually juvenile crime overall is down from what it was in the 90s. But you do hear the shootouts, the armed robberies. Those are the ones that make the headlines.
You bet.
Those are the ones where the citizens say, well, what's going on over at juvenile court? They're not doing their job. Again, let me just say this, I'm a humble public servant, all right? Mm-hmm. By that I mean we went out for a tax increase. Nobody's going to approve a tax increase, okay? So we have got to use the resources that we have. And that's what we're going to do, and we're going to do it as best we can.